Hey guys, it's Cyze, back on the Dragonflight Beta, but this time we're looking at Windwalker Monk. Windwalker Monk has always been one of my main alts for the past 3 expansions. I played it in Battles of Azeroth in the first few tiers as a main. I enjoyed the playstyle, I enjoyed the fact that it changed so much going from single target to A&E, and I thought, while I've been playing it on the beta, I've been recording content, I know enough about the spec to talk about it. I thought I would hop on, we can look at the class tree and the spec tree together, go through the changes that have been made, the additions that Blizzard have put in the past few patches, talking about where they've got this from, so whether it's from previous expansions' borrowed powers, or if it's something completely new in Dragonflight. So I'll go through the talent tree in just a moment, we can have a look at it together, analyse it a little bit, talk about what works well, what works in relation to other talents, and what we might want to see going forward, and how the spec feels, and how it can be made a bit more fluid, how it can feel nicer to play. And with that, let's get into the talent tree. So the Monk class tree is pretty well built at the moment. It's really positive for Windwalker especially, as you are able to take Fortifying Broom, Diffuse Magic and Dampen Harm. It makes for great personal utility, and it means that you're going to have much more survivability in raids. One of the main things then is Resonant Fists. Regardless of what Monk spec you're playing, this is top 3 in your damage. So you might have seen on raid testing or Mythic Plus testing, Brewmaster, Mistweaver and Windwalker have had extremely high damage, and it's weird to see it coming from the class tree, but it scales really well, especially when you look at Brewmaster and Windwalk that can both use one-handed weapons. And another new addition to the spec was Statue of the White Tiger. Statue of the White Tiger was doing extremely high damage in the first iteration of the talent, so Blizzard have tuned it a bit lower. It still feels nice to press, it's still 3 damage, and it pulses quite high in Mythic Plus situations or cleave fights in the raid, so you'll still be seeing all DPS monks play it, as it is a cooldown, it's on 2 minutes, and it's quite flexible in the way it can be used as well. You can place it at a range, it's not on the GCD, so it's all quite a nice addition really. So moving on to the left hand side of the class tree, we have Close to Heart. You and your allies within 10 yards have 4% increased healing taken from all sources. This stacks twice, so you have an 8% increased healing taken from all sources. This is quite nice raid utility, because there are some fights in Vault of the Incarnate that you have a full raid stack, meaning that you'll be able to support your healers get through those hard hitting abilities easier than what they would have normally. On the right hand side of the talent tree, we have Generous Spore, another raid utility talent. You and your allies within 10 yards have 2% increased avoidance, stacking twice. Avoidance reduces the amount of damage you take from area of effect abilities, which there are quite a lot of in the new raid. It's an extremely useful raid utility talent, and you most likely will be taking it, especially on the fights where you have more and more raiders stacked. And with that, let's move on to the Windwalker spec tree itself. So what you'll see at the first glance of the Windwalker spec tree is that they've taken borrowed power from Shadowlands, Legion and Battle for Azeroth, and they've put it into the spec tree. So you've got that in the form of Torghast powers, from which we have Widening Whirl and Shadowbox and Treads. We have conduits such as Zuen's Bond. We have Covenant abilities in the form of Bone Dust Brew, Empowerment in that spell itself, as well as Feyline Stomp, and the Nightfey Covenant conduits, Way of the Fey, Feyline Harmony. So we also have the legendaries from Shadowlands, which we have quite a few. We have Jade Ignition, we have Last Emperor's Capacitor, Zuen's Battle Gear, Invoker's Delight, and Kiefer's Delight in the form of Skyreach. We have a choice node right in the middle, Serenity versus Storm, Earth and Fire. This is the only choice node in the tree. Compared to other classes like Shadow Priest, it's really nice to be able to choose either Serenity or SEF, versus having to choose the likes of Misery or Dark Void, or Dark Ascension versus Void Eruption. Both of them completely different playstyles, and we're not entirely sure which one we're going to be using yet because both of them feel decent. But we are looking at a haste oriented build in regards to Serenity and having to cast Fist of Fury alongside just spinning Crane Kicks, but we'll get into that a bit more later on. So from Legion, we've took Drink and Horn Cover, which was a legendary effect. We've got Strike of the Windlord back, which was the Legion artifact weapon ability. We have Thunder Fist, which was one of the traits, and Transfer the Power at the bottom. All of these show that Blizzard actually went back at other expansions and looked at the borrowed power systems and saw what was working at the time, what needed changing, and they've took the best parts from those expansions and added them in. Doesn't necessarily mean they're all going to work together, but on the beta, from the testing that I've done, it mostly feels fluid, but we'll go into the issues with some of the abilities in a moment. I just want to look at as well Battle for Azeroth Azerite powers. We've got Open Palm Strikes, Glory of the Dawn, and Fury of Zuin at the bottom. All of them are the same abilities as what they were in those expansions. Some of them have been tweaked in regards to percentages, but for the majority it is copied and pasted from those expansions, and we'll have a look at what the general consensus is going forward. So the general consensus from what I can see from the Windwalker Discord and all the things that I've seen on the Dragonflight Beta is that since Legion, what people really wanted was Strike of the Windlord put back into the spec. It will make quite a few people happy to know that it's back in the tree, and the main thing that I'm personally happy with is the interconnectivity between the Windwalker talents, such as having access to Transfer the Power alongside Zuin's Battle Gear. They both empower each other, and it's quite nice to have those interactions. Some of the specs on the beta are missing that, so it's nice to see that Windwalker has access to them. And it's nice to actually have to look at your talents, read them, and see how they interact with each other before picking them. You're not just looking at complete power talents and then just bashing them in from the get-go. It's nice to have the options. So a lot of classes, such as Shadow Priest, have the options for single target and AoE, and you're forced into picking them. So for example, if you did want to go for a more single target oriented build on the Windwalker, you'd be taking Rising Star into Whirl and Dragon Punch, but you're not forced to go Mark of the Crane or Widen and Whirl, because you still have Dancer Chi, which is still going to have you that AoE burst in the form of procs on priority target fights in Keystones alongside Jade Ignition, which when used properly, you can get a big chunk of AoE burst off in a small location by saving your stacks of Chi energy and then expelling them with Spinning Crane Kick. Whether you've got a Chi proc or not, it's still that nice bit of free damage. There is still the discussion of, is Blizzard trying to force a touch of death playstyle? And we'll go into that a bit later on as well. But for example, there's 1, 2, 3 main talents that affect touch of death, and some monks are happy with it because it's a nice change. Some monks think that it could be better in regards to not having all these extra little abilities, so it cleaving. Some monks were happy with it just being an execute. Personally, I like the cleave that it does because it encourages you to target swap on single target encounters. If there's a mob that you can execute and have that damage spread onto the boss, it makes it quite intricate in terms of having to think on the go. But again, I understand why there's a discussion on why it needs to be had, because some players don't like it, some players do, and that's the whole point of these videos and, you know, the Windwalker class Discord, to talk through them and see what people like. And I think that's where the Blizzard developers are getting a lot of their feedback from, as they've listened to Babylonius a lot and Limit Maximum in regards to how they think the spec looks and how they think the tree feels. And I have my own opinions, and I have a friend who has consistently been in the top 10 Warcraft logs all-star points in the past few expansions for Windwalker. He has multiple rank 1s, and his feedback's very important to me, as he's played the spec a lot longer than me. So he's actually given me a few points to talk about and a few things to go over, so I'll try and get that done in this video as well. Again, I share these views with him as he's put a lot of thought into it, so I'd appreciate it if you guys actually took this on board and had a little think about it and had a discussion with me in the comment section as well. So the way it feels at the minute is you're going to be looking at a more haste oriented Windwalker compared to live where it's a bit more crit and versa heavy. So haste looks like it's going to be the play purely because you have a lot of channeled abilities, right? You have Fist of Fury, and you're going to want the high haste because the Fist of Fury channels are going to be better than the spinning crane kick, since you have a lot of Fist of Fury damage buff in this build through Transfer the Power, Open Palm Strikes and Flashing Fists, paired with Zuen's Battle Gear. When Fist of Fury ends, the critical strike chance of Rising Sun Kick is increased by 50%. You want to get through the Fist of Fury channel so you can get back into Rising Sun Kicks. Extremely important talents to have, and the fact that you have a lot of bonus stat procs. For example, you have the haste from Invoker's Delight, you have 50% increased critical strike chance on a lot of these talents such as Skyreach. It's going to be nice to get through the Fist of Fury and get back into the single target rotation. We feel that all of the cooldown reduction talents are very underwhelming. So for example, even Bone Dust Brew, having the Zuen's Bond and the Serenity SEF CDR, it doesn't give enough. It's at maximum a 10% reduction on Invoke Zuen, the White Tiger, and it just feels like it's a wasted talent because you're not seeing an extra Invoke Zuen, the White Tiger, during a fight. And it's quite irrelevant because the desyncing during the fight, so the fact that you will have Invoke Zuen, the White Tiger up maybe one extra time in the fight, but it won't line up with your other cooldowns, it won't line up with Serenity or Storm Earth and Fire or even Summon White Tiger statue. So it feels a bit rough. I think there's too many touch of death nodes. It shouldn't be rotational, we'd much rather have it as an execute only function, although there could be some talent aimed towards giving Windwalkers execute damage, for example with the Guillotine and Forbidden Technique, as well as Meridian Strikes and in the class tree improved touch of death. It's not terrible, but it feels bad to take some of those nodes because there are other damage abilities that you're using a lot more throughout a fight than touch of death. So Glory of the Dawn, it's a bit underwhelming. The damage it does is a bit lacking, personally. Bone Dust Brew feels weak for a node right at the bottom, which grants a radial increase. So Dust in the Wind, it's just a radius node. It feels bad to take because how many situations do you have personally where you're going to have that big of a radius on Bone Dust Brew? A lot of the time in Mythic Plus or in a raid, the mobs are stacked, so you can easily land it and get the bonus damage up on everyone. It feels a bit weak to have Dust in the Wind right at the bottom below a capstone. I understand it's empowering the ability, but if there are other examples and other specializations that have these buffs that don't feel so underwhelming. Jade Ignition feels a little bit weak. It's nice that it's passive damage and you don't really have to think about it, but it feels like it suffers with the same problem it had in Shadowlands where it just isn't tuned well enough. Blizzard have said they're still going to be doing class tuning, so hopefully they up the damage a little bit. Again, you can't really complain because it's passive damage, but it would be nice to see it on the damage meters a little bit higher up. Feline Stomp, I don't see anybody taking. It's a poorly designed ability. You know, the fact that it's 5 enemies, it's got an arc, you've got to stay on the arc. The buffs increase the initial damage and the target's hit, but it just isn't enough. It's too clunky to use in a situation where you're going into a fight and there's mobs spread out, not everything's stacked on time. And alongside that, you've got Russian Jadewind on the left as well. It suffers from the same issue it's had in Shadowlands. It was never used. You're spending 1 chi on this for such lackluster damage, and the fact that it pulls in all enemies is nice, but you have DKs for that. You have other Typhoons, you have Ring of Peace to stack things up. Russian Jadewind, it just feels so underwhelming to play. But it's I understand why it's there because it's a core part of the monk class fantasy, but Blizzard need to decide if they want to increase the damage on it or just drop it completely. And Widen and Well, Spinning Crane Kick radius increased by 15%. Whilst it is nice to have, it's a nice quality of life, it's not needed. And I feel like Blizzard are okay to have talents on the tree that are quality of life completely because there will be quite a few people that like taking them. But personally, I wouldn't take this because if you're playing properly and you're in the right situation, you know, you're stood correctly, you're going to be hitting everyone with Spinning Crane Kick. I feel like whilst it feels nice to play, the spec feels fluid. You know, there's no real problem in terms of how it plays. You know, you're not GCD capped, you're not energy capped, you're not struggling, you're not energy starved either, really. It's a nice balance in the middle. But I feel like some of the talents and the nodes could be improved either by purely just class tuning. If Blizzard decides to, you know, look at the tree again and up some of these damage abilities, I'd be happy with it. But at the same time, I feel like there's a lot of things that just have been brought along from Shadowlands that weren't used, and it would have been nice to see Blizzard take their initiative and say, this wasn't used, we're going to buff it steadily as we go along. Or even if they communicated that with us and said, you know, we understand it's a bit low in damage at the minute, but this is what we're going to be doing, and have X amount of increases throughout until we get to a good balance point. Or they just need to say, listen, we know it wasn't used, we're going to take it away, we're going to redesign it and bring it back in the future. But as it stands right now, Russian Jadewind will never be taken throughout the entirety of Dragonflight as well, bar maybe situational encounters where you need to grip enemies in if you don't have a DK. But again, like I said, there's other classes that just do that better. Strike of the Windlord is really nice to have as well, but I feel like it should do increased damage based on if it's used in a single target situation or AoE. So for example, AoE, it spreads out the damage, but on single target it would do a full load of damage up front. Again, that's up to Blizzard to design. I'm just throwing out ideas. But generally, I like how it feels. I'm quite happy to going to be playing it in Dragonflight going forward. But all the things that I've mentioned are issues, and they are things that Blizzard are going to have to look at going forward. But again, the spec works. Unlike Shadow Priest, where everything feels clunky, Windwalker is the opposite. It feels fluid, it feels nice to play, and I'm happy with where it is currently. But it does feel like the devs have dropped the ball on some of the talent choices, so they've brought back things from the past that were amazing and I'm really excited to see again. But on the same time, they've kept Feline Stomp and they've kept Bone Dust Brew, which I don't personally like, from the feedback they've had from a lot of Windwalker players themselves. It's not looking good in terms of these talents specifically. But overall, I am happy with where it sits. I'm going to keep playing it on the beta every time, you know, there's raid testing, Mythic Plus testing. It's not just a flying visit. I've always enjoyed Windwalker Monk. I'm going to keep enjoying it, and I will be playing it going into Dragonflight as well. I'm just hoping to see some of these issues fixed before launch, or even maybe in the second patch of the expansion. But we'll have to wait and see. But with that, team, I would just like to say thank you for watching. I really appreciate the fact that you guys are open to me looking at different classes, different specs, you know, putting these up on YouTube. The main thing is, I understand people watch me for the Shadow Priest content, and that'll still be coming. But I'm playing these other classes anyway, I'm recording the content. I enjoy talking about them, and I enjoy getting these out to a wider audience. And I love discussions. I love having discussions with you guys in the comments, on Discord, because it makes me a better player. It opens my mind up to different things that I may not have seen or noticed. And I'd like to think that it educates you guys as well. If there's anything you would like to know, please ask. I reply as quick as I can. And I've enjoyed looking at the spec itself. But with that, guys, I just want to say thank you again for watching. Feel free to like and subscribe, and check out my Twitch in the description below. Feel free to give it a follow. I do stream most days, whether it's Mythic Plus on live, Mythic Plus on the beta, retail raid and raid testing on the beta. I'm always active. And feel free to drop a comment down below with any discussions you'd like to have regarding Windwalker. But with that, take care, guys.